there, bonsai lovers. It's me, Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu. This is the Bonsai Stuff podcast. Appreciate you listening in as always. And I'd just like to say happy repotting season. That time is upon us again. I've just got back from spending some time with lovely people in South Australia. Went over there and did some workshops, and one of the things that got raised was that they love the podcast because it's timely. It's a reminder, it's a refresher, it's a prompt, it's all that sort of stuff for what we do right now in Southern Australia. Hopefully it helps you wherever you are listening around the world, but it's really, really pleasing that the prompts, that the things I talk about in the podcast are just the right time to sort of say, hey, it's time to do, whatever, fertilising, whatever. So today's podcast, this week's podcast, which is episode 27 of season 7, flying along. We're very early in the July period, and for me, repotting is in full swing. So I thought, why not talk about that nice and early, get it up and going in the correct way. So anyone who's listening, who looks at their trees and goes, you know what, it's about time for me to repot as well. And those points that I raise, hopefully they can help, guide, refresh. You may be doing everything perfectly, and this is just something pleasing to confirm that for you. It may be that there's some things that this podcast may raise for you that you need to investigate further. It could be a whole change of mindset. Whatever it is, repotting's definitely underway. The trees are starting to look like they're waking up. As I walk around my own yard, I look at the deciduous, and some of the buds are starting to move, starting to swell. So that means that stored energy that they've put in there over the autumn period, held over the dormant period of winter, they're starting to look at the days getting longer now, and they're going to start releasing that stored resource, which means that growth is going to come. I refer back to last episode of the podcast where I talked about climate change and all that sort of stuff. Maybe it is a bit early. I have had trees in the past that, like my desert ash, that as soon as we get past the shortest day of the year, the damn thing started pushing growth the very next day. So I do have a big quince in my yard that is definitely moving at the moment, starting to open. So I will need to take protective care of these ones just in case we do get a cold snap. There's lots of rain, lots of cold weather still ahead of us during this latter part of the winter period. But now, we're sort of halfway through the winter period now. Geez, that's gone fast, but we're halfway through, and it means that spring is not far off. So for me, the repotting window really left is this last part of July and sort of all of August. So it's not a long time to make sure that you're on top of it. I've said about flagging your trees in the past for repotting, so you know what you're up for. Now, in this part, I want to talk about the technique and why it's so important. So grab yourself a cuppa and let's get into it. Now, I don't talk much about a few things on the podcast because they're controversial. And I want to talk about soil mix like I want a hole in the head, but I feel that I have to because I've got a relevant story from very recently that I found it very refreshing and reassuring. And everyone that I seem to run into since that point, I start showing photographs. So I'll explain it to you what happened. So in South Australia, I was with a friend, and we were looking at repotting a forest, a privet forest of all things. Lovely little youngish thing that had been repotted before, gone from sort of a grow area where the trees were sort of put together by the original person. Then it was purchased and it was put into a better mix. And part of the agenda was to change the composition to make it more interesting forest, which is very common. And what that involves when you get a forest is you need to, once those roots interlock with each other, it can be very difficult. They become one being effectively, which makes future repottings really easy because you take it out, treat it as one tree, work the roots like you would a single tree and sort of forget that the forest is there. And it's quite simple. But when you want to take trees and say, look, I really don't like them there, I want to move this, I want to make it more interesting, I want to add space here, I want to do this, I want to do that. What that involves, or my process for it, is to use a sickle. The repotting sickle that we use around the edge of the pot when you're repotting to break the bond between the tree and the pot. And I use the sickle to actually get through and sever. Try and leave as much root as you possibly can, but it's very hard when you've got a forest to know exactly what it is that you're leaving and what you're removing when you go through with a sickle like that. Anyway, that's not the part of the story that I want to tell. So we had to take the trees apart. So imagine there's 12, 15 trees. I don't know what it was exactly, but there was a lot of trees in this forest. And the forest sitting maybe 60, 70 centimetres wide across. So it's a reasonable size. And there happened to be 2 trees that were on the periphery. We thought, okay, well, the distance between those 2 trees is nice, but if we took those and we shuffled them sort of to the right side of the pot, then we'd get more of a separation between the 2 halves on the forest, which is what we were aiming for. Anyway, take the sickle, leave enough room around each of the trees and cut it. Go through and cut it. So I'll just give you the backstory. The trees originally were planted in a very heavy soil, like dirt. Let's call it garden soil. Not much better than that. It wasn't even a bonsai mix that you can buy at a major hardware store. It was just very fine, very silty dirt, like topsoil that you get if you were dressing your lawn or something like that. Then it had been taken from there and put into a soil mix, which I use and I endorse, and it's just purely pumice, scoria, pine nuggets, equal portions, all around the 4 to 7 mil mark thereabouts. I don't want to get into it too much, but that, as I said earlier, I don't want to talk about soil mix like I want a hole in the head. But that was on the, if you imagine a cross section which we just cut by separating these 2 trees, when you turn that around and look at it like a piece of pie, where you see this beautiful cross section that had been cut very clean with the sickle, you could see that the very bottom layer, say the bottom centimetre of roots, fine fibrous feed roots. Perfect. Exactly what we need for bonsai. Exactly. But then about the next 3 centimetres was this old soil, because it was on the inner section of the root ball and couldn't be removed at the time of the original potting. Because it was the fine silty part, when you compare the 2 and look at the cross section, there was not one feeder root in that old soil. So the soil had got so fine, so compacted. It was wet in that part as well, whereas the bottom part was nice and dry where the roots were with the more open mix. But that section where it had the dirt, for want of a better word, there was nothing that was providing anything to the tree whatsoever. There was thicker roots that we had to cut through that had been there sort of since day one, the vessels that connect to those fine feeder roots. But the actual feeder roots were all in the very bottom section of this cross section. And it made it, it's like the lights going on at the MCG, which is the largest stadium in Australia. When that happened, just looking at it, it's like, and I pointed, I said, that's why we use good soil mix. That's exactly the reason why over time, if you collect a tree or if you purchase a tree from somebody, when you're doing repotting, it's so important to make sure that old soil eventually is removed. I don't wash roots. I'm not talking about anything like that. But over time, it might not be you do it all in one repotting. It might be something that gets targeted and done over, maybe a 2 or 3 or 4 repotting seasons. And they could be 2-3 years apart each. So it's not something that you have to rush into. But if you think about your pot capacity for root growth, every area that's got that dense dirt in it, it's not going to grow roots. So therefore, you're losing capacity for your tree to grow. And you might think, I've got this in a really large pot. It's doing great. It should do great. It's got so much room to grow roots. It doesn't. It's only going to grow roots in that area where it's got the open mix. That part where the roots will get exactly what they want, start to split and divide and suck up nutrients and pass it all up to the tree. And of course, what happens below happens above. If you've got, dirt, then you will have terrible roots. If you've got terrible roots, that won't support fantastic growth up the top, I can guarantee you. So if you get fine feeder roots that are thick and fast, you can grow plenty of foliage up the top. And it's very easy to tell when you look at raw stock. If you've got really long extended growth and very little tufts of growth on the end, then I can guarantee you almost that root system will be very, very poor. You got fine, delicate growth that's in nice and close, and it's just jumping out of its skin. There has to be a good root system to support that. Has to be. It can't work any other way. The tree can't have a handful of roots and have 500 branches up the top that it supports. If it's got a handful of roots, it'll have a handful of branches. If it's got 1 million roots down the bottom, it'll have a lot of branches for you to style and design your bonsai with. So your soil mix really needs to be something which, again, this is entirely up to everybody to pick what their perfect soil mix is. And, the best advice I can give you is don't make it overly complicated. Just because you're dealing with tree X and when you move across to tree Y, don't add 3% more of, something just to make it more complex. The trees, I use one. This is with that hand on heart. I use one soil mix for absolutely every single tree in my collection. Whatever variety they are, whatever stage of development they're at, they all get and no matter how big they are or small they are, they all get exactly the same soil mix. And, my trees seem to be doing well. They look nice and healthy. They take food up really well. They've got plenty of options for me to develop. So your soil mix really needs to be something which is going to benefit your tree. All right, don't make it complex on yourself. Don't make it so it's going to cost you $1 million to repot every single tree in your collection. Make it that it's sustainable, that you can do it year on year. I'm very much against that chopping and changing every time that you repot. Once you find the mix and you're happy with the results that the tree delivers and that everything that you're doing in your world works really well for your bonsai, then just hold it for a little while. Don't go changing it because some silly bugger like me gets on and says, you should do this, because if it seems to be working really well for you and the tree's strong and vibrant and you're achieving what you want, then stick with it. But the more open the mix, pumice is a godsend. I've said that so many times on the podcast, but it is seriously a godsend, and I find that it's one of the best particles that we can add to our soil mix. So whatever it is you're using, try and incorporate pumice to it to hold it open and provide soil, air, and capacity for the tree to develop these fine feeder roots. But this cross section that I found on the privet, and if you ever come into the workshop or you ever see me face to face, I'll gladly show it to you, because it paints a beautiful story as to why we use certain soil mixes and why we, more importantly, why we don't use others. And if you've got a young tree, you've got something coming out of the ground, you've got whatever it is, use the best soil mix that you can. Don't compromise because it's young or it's not a bonsai yet. I thoroughly believe the quicker you can get a solid root system, the quicker you're going to have a brilliant bonsai. And it might cut decades off the development of the tree, because if you use substandard soil early on, then nothing's really going to happen with that tree until you make the decision to move to a better quality soil mix. I guarantee you that's from experience. Now, I'm a stickler for good technique. It's sloppy work. When it comes to your wiring or your pruning practices or your wound management, whatever, I think that you've got a beautiful living tree that's your responsibility, and you need to take care. And doing a crappy job takes just as long as doing a good job. Honestly, it does, because if you can slow down and perfect that technique, then over time it gets quicker and quicker. So, and you shouldn't be doing bonsai if you're in a rush, definitely. So, linking that to this beautiful task that we have of repotting, which is one of my favourite times of the year for my bonsai. I use that a lot, but I really mean it when it comes to repotting because, trees rejuvenate. And when we repot, we offer the tree the opportunity to grow all these new roots, and it jumps out of its skin and goes, "Thank you very much. I will reward you with beautiful growth now that you've given me excess room to grow my roots." And it means that with all these beautiful, fine feeder roots that I've got, whenever you fertilise me, I will take that and I will use that accordingly. Over time, the tree becomes more compacted in the pots, and if it's 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it is with repotting, no matter how good the soil is, those roots will run out of capacity and it'll start to suffer. The tree will start to go backwards and you'll start getting dieback and the spring growth won't be as good as what it should be. So you'll find that this rejuvenation process of repotting is a shot in the arm for the tree. And honestly, for me, it's a shot in the arm for me because seeing the trees respond after you've done something like this, it's like, oh, that's so good. Good on me. Good on the tree. We're working together on this thing, and we're both trying to achieve perfection somewhere down the track. And it's, you can't keep pushing the tree and asking it to do so much without doing the right thing back. So when it comes to repotting, technique is everything. Absolutely everything. It takes time. It takes practice. It's the sort of thing that if you've only got a few trees in your collection, let's say you've got 10 trees and you're repotting every 2 years, then, this year you might be repotting, 2, 3, 4, 5 trees at best, maybe, because you'll split them up a little bit. That's not a lot of trees to practice on. When I repot throughout the year, it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, not just of my own, but a lot of other people. So I get it that you can watch someone who does repotting or does this sort of thing for a living, and you can suddenly go, well, that's impossible. That's not going to happen. But everything starts with the first step. Everything starts by slowing things down and doing it the best you possibly can. And one of the things that you really need to work on is the tying in of your trees. That's probably when I come across a lot of bonsai, and the first thing up on the bench, the tree's not doing well. It just seems to do okay, and then things go wrong with it, and these pests come in, and I don't know what's wrong with it. First thing I'll do is I'll take the tree and I'll check it in the pot if it's secure, if it moves. So if that tree's loose in the pot, the first thing I'll hear will be, oh yeah, it hasn't been tied in properly. Oh, it's been moving forever. I've only got roots growing on this part of the tree or whatever it is. It's like, okay, so when you repot it, it's really important to make sure that tree does not move. Otherwise, if there's any movement, any slight movement whatsoever, as those new roots start to grow, the tree moves in the wind, gets knocked on the bench, whatever it is, those roots start to break. Once they start to break, the tree starts running out of resources. It's only got so much in the tank that it can give. So making sure that it's tied in ensures you that as those new roots grow, they're going to continue to grow and push through that root system, and they're going to get stronger. The tree gets stronger. Poor tie-in technique and rushing that part of the process is so common. So common, but it's easy to fix. I use a 4-way tie-in method. You put in two wires into hopefully 4 holes in the bottom of the pot. If not 2, you still feed up 2 tie-in wires, which gives you 4 pieces of tie-in wire. And rather than it's common to bring 2 together, so they tie in. And when you bring those 2 wires together, they always go to the nabari, always go to the center of the pot, and it's something that's visible, something that you see. The 4-way tie-in technique takes the first wire across to the second wire and ties in. So it pushes to the periphery. It goes further down the root ball. Rather than coming to the middle, it comes to the edge of the pot. Then the second wire goes across to the third, again staying around the outside of the pot, third to the fourth. Add an extra wire to the first wire, join the 2 together. It's a 4-way tie-in. There's if you have a look on YouTube, there'll be videos of it there. I've got on Instagram, if you go back through the old stuff for repotting time last year, there's pictures of the 4-way tie-in. It's a technique that allows you to clamp the outside of the root ball and force it down and push it down. doesn't need to. It's not the only way that you can secure trees in the pot. There's so many different ways that you can use it, but the important part, the really, really super important part that I want you to take away from today is that your tree cannot move. One way that I test my trees after I've repotted is to grab it by the trunk and pick it up and give it a little wiggle. So if that pot stays nice and close to the tree and the tree stays secure to the pot, that's absolutely perfect for me. And it's a technique that takes time. It takes practice. And when I first learnt it, I remember I would get a piece of wood and I would put it across the pot, have my 4-way tie-in, and I would practice on that. Make sure that I had it right before I get to a living tree and start working on that. So for me, tying in your trees, it's perfect or it's start again. There's no oh, that's good enough. There's no near enough. That's okay. It has to be perfect. Okay, we need it because it's going to support those new roots that start to grow, and make sure that if somewhere down the track something gets knocked off the bench, pot breaks, the root ball stays intact, which is exactly what we want. And then that's a whole nother podcast, emergency repotting. Anyway, from the time that you take the tree out of the pot for repotting, the clock starts. Okay, you cannot dilly-dally. You cannot take your time. You cannot go and make a fresh cup of coffee once you've got that tree out of the pot. Once those roots start getting exposed to the air, they start to die, and the root ball being taken out of the container starts to dry out. So you start losing control of what you remove because it starts to die naturally. So for me, I always make sure that I've got absolutely all my ducks lined up. I've got my soil mix ready to go. I've got the tie-in wires that I want to use. I've got the pot if I'm changing it. I've got my mesh. I've got all my tools lined up and I know exactly where they are and I'm ready to go. There's no stuffing around with this thing. Sometimes it helps to have a misting sprayer. If it is a long repot, just give the roots a little bit of a spray. But 99.5% of the time, I don't need to worry about that because I know exactly what I'm going to do. I work thoroughly and I get the tree back into the pot nice and quickly. And I'm not caught by surprise for anything. I know exactly what it is. Like phone's not getting answered. I'm not going out to talk to somebody. The doors are shut on the workshop, and it's just get the job done. It's so important to make sure that you don't stuff around when you're repotting. If I'm going back into the same pot, then it's a little bit more pressure for me when I'm repotting, but it's still manageable, right? It's still manageable. Take the tree out of the pot with a sickle, cut the tie-in wires, and take the tree out and keep the root ball intact. Don't touch that root ball. Put it aside, get your pot that you're going to go back into, give it a clean, give it a wash, give it a scrub, whatever it is. Put in the new mesh, put in the tie-in wires, put in, if there is a drainage layer, I'll talk about that in a minute, or your soil mix, a nice mound in the middle, and then put that aside, then get to that root ball. Because once you start raking and opening up that root ball, it starts to dry out. Roots start to die. So you've got to make sure that you've got the pot that it's going to go back into. So as soon as you're finished, you've raked the roots, you've cut them, you've removed what you want, you've allowed for an angle change, whatever it is that you're wanting to achieve with repotting. Once you've got all that ready to go, bang, the tree straight onto that new soil mix, wiggle it in, do the tie-in, make sure it's nice and secure, add new soil, get some sphagnum moss on top of it, and then water it in. Tree barely misses a beat because that can all happen, it doesn't happen immediately, but it's not dragged out over hours and hours and hours. It's once you've got the tree out of the pot and you're working those roots, it's not going to be dragging on for forever. So I like to be prepared, but I also like to make sure that the tree is not going to suffer because of anything that I do. Like I said, be prepared, line it up, make sure you've got everything ready to go, and then start rolling. So now drainage layer. The last thing I'm going to yabber on about with repotting, drainage layers. Drainage layers are great if you've got capacity within the pot. All right, so normally a drainage layer might be something which is a medium. For me, it's scoria, and it might be, let's say, I'll pick a figure, because normal scoria size that I use is about 7 mil, so or 5 to 7 mil. So when I'm working on drainage layer, I want something slightly bigger than that. The idea with the drainage layer is it keeps the feet of the bonsai out of any low points in the pot, or keeps them continually wet, which is when rot can happen. So by putting in a drainage layer, you're sort of lifting the tree up a little bit and allowing that water to flow through. Roots will still grow into it eventually, so don't worry about it. It's allowing the water to get out of the soil mix, because you want water retention with your soil mix. You just don't want the tree staying constantly wet, which is where the roots will start to suffer and start to rot. So let's say you put in a 15 mil particle size of a drainage layer, lift it up, and then you put a nice even layer of your soil mix that you're going to be using over the top, and then you put a mound on it, and then the tree goes and sits on top of that. That all sounds perfect in theory, and in reality, it doesn't always work like that. If you've got a pot that's, let's say, 4 centimeters deep on the inside, you look at your root ball, you can probably get it down to maybe 3 centimeters when you take it out of the pot. So you're taking off 1 centimeter underneath the pot. That's what I'm talking about at the moment. It's just underneath the pot, underneath the root ball, the bottom part. So if your root ball, which is the size that the pot it came out of, is 4 centimeters, taking a centimeter off is normal. So therefore, you've only got 1 centimeter of soil mix or drainage layer or whatever it is below the root ball, below the bonsai when you put it back in for repotting. 1 centimeter is not enough to get your 15 mil scoria size into the pot. So therefore, by putting a drainage layer in, you're going to push the tree almost out of the pot completely. The root ball is going to sit way above the pot. Not on. So in that circumstance, I find it's perfectly fine when you're using an open mix like I do, just to exclude the drainage layer, go straight to the soil mix. So therefore, you've got 1 centimeter of soil. Because I'm using up to 7 millimeters anyway, I find that my soil mix is draining nicely. The tree's roots are not sitting in boggy water. So it's the need for a drainage layer in smaller pots starts to disappear. That said, if I get a big pot that, let's say it's one of the bigger trees, it's maybe, 20 centimeters on the inside, by all means, I'll put a nice drainage layer, probably double it up. So instead of, if I've got 15 mil of scoria, I'll put a double layer in there, so it's sort of 3 centimeters of drainage layer at the bottom of that pot to keep the big tree lifted up nice and get that air flow, that air water transfer through the pot system. Perfect, no worries at all. But don't feel bad, and don't feel that it's always something that you have to do is have a drainage layer, because your pots just don't allow for it. And if you do allow for it, you're going to start pushing that root ball way up out of the pot, which is just unnecessary. So if you're not using an open mix, then you should. But that drainage layer becomes more important, because it's providing that layer that the roots will grow into, because it's far more open and doesn't hold the water and allows for everything to happen. So anyway, that's enough for repotting for this week. I'm sure there'll be others over the next sort of 6 weeks while repotting season's on, but just as a refresher, as you're getting into repotting, some places around Australia, it's a little bit later, so you've still got time. Other places, repotting's well underway, and it might be time just to double check your technique, make sure that it's perfect, do some research, and make sure that you're doing the right thing. It's a rejuvenation task. It's really important. It only happens every so often, every 2 to 5 years, whatever it is. Make sure it's done properly, and your bonsai will reach its little branches out around your back and give you a nice warm cuddle. Well, that's it, folks. Go forth and repot. Thanks for listening in. I love it. Thank you to subscribers too and supporters of the podcast and everyone that loves it. And it's so nice to travel around and meet people that, I think as I record this podcast, no one will listen to it. But that's not the case. And I'm so pleased that it's something positive in your bonsai life, and it really means a hell of a lot to me, to be honest, to hear you say that, and it provides a bit of a spring in my step to make this thing keep rolling. So thank you very much to everyone that's reached out recently and said very kind words, which is nice. Anyway, repotting, be on it. Make sure that you've got everything right. You've got a window. Don't leave it too late. If those buds start to open, for me, it's sort of you've missed the window, and things start to take a bit of a dip after there. So be on it. Be quick. Be thorough. Be precise. Do the best you can, and I guarantee you'll come back in 3 or 4 months, or the time that you will see the best bang for your buck when it comes to repotting is the heart of summer, when you've got that stinking hot temperature, but your tree just keeps on charging on because you're giving it water. It's got the root capacity, those fine feeder roots just suck up that water through its system to stop any leaf burn or any damage that you've had in the past. That's when you see the real result, and that's when your tree just sort of says, thank you very much for what you've done. Anyway, love you all. Thanks for listening in. Appreciate it, and I look forward to the next podcast coming out next week. Surprise, surprise. Until then, make sure you give your trees a cuddle for me, give them some love, and make sure that you are spending time with them, because they're a valuable, precious resource that we only get a certain amount of time with, and it's up to us to make sure that we do the best that we possibly can. Till next time, as always, happy bonsai.